Coming up, college football playoff rankings come out tonight, and there could be some surprises involving SEC teams. We'll discuss next right here on AT&T SEC Country Live. Hello everyone, and welcome to AT&T's SEC Country Live. My name is Brandon Adams, the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson, and I guess it occurred to us just before the show started today, should we have worn like Halloween costumes or something today? It's not really my style so much. Maybe we should have.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't worn a costume probably since college.
One of our producers, Michael, was sort of scrambling around to see if he could find a pumpkin to like put on the middle of the stage.
We're so unfestive, man.
Maybe this is the thing that we should have thought about before the show, maybe. You know what? How about this? Let's just do what we do every day, which is give you an hour's worth of SEC talk, including Benjamin Wolk to talk about the Auburn Tigers, a little less than 20 minutes from right now, and then 40 minutes after the hour, we'll address the rumors of Dan Mullen potentially being involved in the Florida coaching situation with Brandon Walker, who does our Mississippi State podcast for SECCountry.com as well. So we'll do that kind of stuff today. How about that?
Well, honestly, I mean, if you're a Florida or Tennessee fan, odds are we're going to scare you at some point today anyway.
Oh, that's a pretty good line. I like that.
No costume needed.
I like that a lot. AT&T, of course, a proud sponsor of AT&T's SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. Make the switch to AT&T Wireless and DirecTV. They'll help you stay connected all season long. Let's dive into the big story here off the top of the show, though. It's our number one item on our first and 10 on AT&T's SEC Country Live today, and that is a look ahead to tonight and the college football playoff rankings which come out. Now, we know the truth here that what happens tonight by the committee is not necessarily all that significant. Think back to 2014 when the first college football rankings ever came out. It was Mississippi State who was ranked number one in that poll. Obviously, they didn't win the national championship or even make the playoff that season. But just because it's not important doesn't mean it's not fun to debate. Now, I do think it's fun to debate this stuff. And for me, when I look at how the SEC might kind of fare in these rankings tonight, for me, it's Georgia who I think should be ranked ahead of Alabama, and I actually believe that's what the committee is going to do. I believe that Georgia will be the number one team in the country tonight, according to the College Football Playoff Selection Committee.
Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked. Listen, the committee has shown the ability to kind of think forward, saying, you know what, we can put Alabama wherever we want to right now, and I have a hard time thinking they're going to put two teams from the same conference at 1 and 2 because they think forward. They know that in order to get to the College Football Playoff, these teams are going to have to play each other anyways, and so they would wind up there in the end regardless. And so I think you're going to see something like you might even see Georgia number 1, Alabama number 2, Notre Dame's going to be up there. You're going to see the same old names here in the top 4. I've actually got Clemson sitting at number 4 as well. And so I think the committee has shown the ability to kind of look forward, understand who's playing each other down the stretch, and say, you know what, let's not set ourselves up for failure. These teams are going to have to play each other, so let's not make for a big griping argument right now.
When I put the side-by-side comparison between Georgia and Alabama, the one thing I keep coming back to is there's nothing on the Alabama resume that matches Georgia going on the road and winning at Notre Dame. Now, I don't think Alabama has to apologize for its Florida State win. When it played at the beginning of the season, DeAndre Francois was still healthy. Alabama knocked him out of the game. That, to me, still feels like a quality win, even if Florida State's lost a bunch of games since then. So I don't think Alabama has to apologize for what Florida State has not turned out to be. It's more the presence of what Georgia has. That road win against Notre Dame is just an extra check in the Georgia box. Both teams have dominated all the SEC teams they played, but Alabama does not have that road win. Now, Alabama's going to have plenty of chances to prove itself, including a head-to-head game likely against Georgia at the end of the season. But for now, if we're going to have this debate, let's use the elements we have at our disposal, and Georgia's just got a better win than what Alabama has.
I mean, I agree with you. When you look at it from that perspective, I think there's definitely a merit to the argument to have Georgia number 1. I think back on that Alabama-Florida State game, number 1 versus number 3, the greatest opener of all time. For me, when I've looked at Florida State the last couple of weeks, they look uninterested. I mean, they look like they're not even paying attention to what's going on in the game, getting blown out Friday night against Boston College. I wonder how that Florida State team would have fared had they won that game and had DeAndre Francois stayed healthy, because I think all of a sudden there's a ton more interest. All of a sudden, you're probably got Florida State number 1 going into week number 2, and it's a different look out on the team. I hate looking at schedules in hindsight. I think when you look at Florida State and their ability and everything they have going on in that team, they could have been a good football team this year. Yes, Alabama hasn't played many quality teams since then, but I think they've got the ability down the stretch. So Alabama or Georgia, number 1, number 2, it won't bother me anyway. But I think Alabama, when you look at it, I mean, listen, you've said it a couple times on the show. To be the man, you got to beat the man. Yeah. Alabama's been the target all year. They've been number 1. And when you wear that number 1 on your back, you're a target the entire season.
Josh Belisle says, LOL, it's Notre Dame. LOL. That's 2 LOLs. He must not really like Notre Dame at all. He gave us LOLs at the beginning and end of his comment. Preston Robinson says, Georgia ain't nowhere near number 1. Joel Cunningham says Notre Dame versus UGA was a pillow fight. Listen, I mean, we got to come up with some better arguments than the team that you're arguing against hasn't played anybody. I mean, that's like the oldest deal in the world here. Well, you know, Georgia hasn't played anybody. I mean, what else do you want to see Notre Dame do? They've beaten, ranked NC State. They've been winning, against ranked opponents week after week after week. They're, pulling up 300 rushing yards in every single one of these games. Only team they couldn't run the football against was Georgia. I mean, you don't have to pretend that Notre Dame's not any good to sort of bolster the Alabama argument here.
Yeah, listen, and the reason I have Notre Dame and Clemson in my top 4 because of their remaining schedules. Because I think the committee looks at it and says, okay, who are they playing the rest of the way? Are we safe if we go ahead and stick this team in the top 4? Do we think there's a chance that they could win out and play some good opponents down the stretch? Notre Dame still has to play a good Wake Forest team. They have to play Miami, they have to play Navy, and they have to play Stanford. So go ahead and stick Notre Dame in there at number 3, knowing that there's a chance they could trip up, and if they don't, then you look brilliant sitting there at number 3.
Cliff Nelson says the team you are at the beginning of the season is nothing like who you are mid-season or the end. LSU, ergo Bama's win over Florida State's now meaningless. Well, Cliff also talking about his team, the LSU Tigers. Let me squeeze this in here real quick before we move on to a different subject. Obviously, Georgia and Alabama, the two top-rated teams in from the SEC side in the playoff rankings tonight. I will admit, though, I'm a little curious to see where 2-loss LSU, 2-loss Auburn come in this discussion, because these are teams that could still win the SEC West. And last year, a 2-loss Penn State team, at least for a moment, was in the discussion being the college football playoff. Yeah. I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibility that where one of these teams get the win against Alabama, get to the SEC championship game, you could still see one of these teams still be alive in the college football playoff discussion. I'm kind of curious of how much of a chance the committee gives them. How high of a ladder do they have to leap up to get to that point? LSU and Auburn are on my radar today.
There's no doubt about it. No, especially when you look at Auburn, you look at the fact that they have to play Georgia and Alabama down the stretch, and possibly a rematch with Georgia if they win both of those games. And so you're looking at you're looking at 3 possible top 5 victories for Auburn right now, sitting at a 2-loss team. That would give them the best chance, I think, of any 2-loss team in the country to make it to the playoffs.
All right, speaking of LSU, let's make them also the subject of item number 2 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list, and the game that LSU is going to play on Saturday against Alabama. Complicated, maybe somewhat, by some words from LSU running back Darius Guice at the end of last season in November, and then reiterated again at SEC Media Days back in July. And I don't know if you remember this. Now, we actually talked about this on the show, what Guice had said at SEC Media Days. But let me show you the quote on the screen from Guice after the Arkansas game last year. This is sort of apropos of nothing, but Guice says, Alabama always stacks 10 people in the box to stop us. They're scared as well. This is what Guice said after the Arkansas game, after they'd already played Alabama. It sort of seems like a weird thing to even say. And as you might imagine, the Alabama players have paid attention to this a little bit this week. We'll show you what Minkah Fitzpatrick, the star Alabama safety, said. It was brought up the other day. We don't really have anything to say about that, but my guess is behind closed doors, Fitzpatrick and his teammates have plenty to say. Do you think Guice's words are extra motivation for Alabama on Saturday?
Yeah, I do. I do, and I don't think there's any way around it. I think when you call a team like Alabama scared, then obviously something's askew. Because listen, when you're Darius Guice and when you have the running attack, the one-dimensional running attack they did for the last couple of years against Alabama, you're going to get exposed.
Not so much this year.
Not so much this year, and I think that's what makes it a lot different when you come into this season. You have Matt Canada as the coordinator, and you have a couple extra wrinkles in your offense. It's going to be up to them to get Alabama's defense off balance. It's going to be up to them to make Alabama not scared and to back that guy out of the box. Listen, 9, 8, 10 defenders, I don't care what it is right now. Alabama's been stopping the run against LSU for quite some time. And so you can call it scared. I call it smart football, but I guarantee it's been mentioned in that meeting room.
Well, here's the thing, and I try to put myself in the position of a fan. I'm not an LSU fan, but here's what I would feel about this if I was an LSU fan. This is the dumbest statement in the world. And if I'm an LSU fan, I want to scream and say, this can't count as bulletin board material because it doesn't make any sense. And yet Alabama's going to pretend like this is the biggest injustice ever. And the same way that Nick Saban's always getting in his players' head, like with Ole Miss the other day, he said the biggest disrespect of all is privately thinking that you've got a team's number. I mean, Saban's always dialing this kind of stuff up, and to think that LSU, Darius Guice, might play right into Alabama's hands with a phrase and a statement that doesn't even make any sense. Of course you'd stack the box to stop the run if you thought that was all an offense was capable of doing. This is what's worse for LSU, is Alabama's going to go pound them because of what Darius Guice said, and what Guice said doesn't even make any sense.
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing I thought about when we kind of re-talked about this today was, hey, listen, you might not have to worry about a scared Alabama defense because they might back a couple of people off because of the passing game this week, because LSU's going to have a struggling offensive line in front of Darius Guice, a couple of freshmen up there, KJ Malone's still injured. You don't know what you're getting up front. So you might have to worry about it if you're Darius Guice. You might have to worry about 10-man boxes because they might be more concerned with the passing game right now.
I like Michael Damper's quote. He says, Bama's the best in the SEC and on a revenge tour this year. They're going to beat Georgia in the SEC championship game to quiet all you haters. So that's obviously a reference back to our first topic, but the idea of Alabama being on a revenge tour is actually relevant for what we're talking about right now. And the reason why I even bring up the Darius Guice stuff on today's show is it does seem like Alabama has used a lot of this year. And I'm extrapolating, this may not even be true, but for a team that's won the SEC, 3 consecutive years, been a fixture in the college football playoff, national championship, one of many that Nick Saban won from a couple years ago, you do have to keep finding extra motivation. For a team like Georgia, the motivation is easy. This is the first time this program has been doing something like this in a long time. For Alabama, it's a little bit more difficult. So you do pick off a Darius Guice statement. Yeah. You do focus in on the goofy Vanderbilt defensive lineman. You kind of do that kind of stuff to sort of maintain your edge from week to week. Yeah. I mean, I'm not kidding here. I think the Guice thing is silly, but I think Alabama's probably going to use it because Michael says they're on a revenge tour.
Listen, I bet Scott Cochran's probably got TVs in the weight room playing old Alabama clips of them playing bad, and he's probably got a ticker tape at the bottom with every quote from every other team going down at the bottom. And listen, what was how does the old quote go from the billionaire? I think it was Warren Buffett that said the second billion's the hardest one.
Oh, that's good. I like that.
I think that's the way you got to look at Alabama football. You can get there and win a national title, and everybody can play up to a certain level, but staying there is what is tough in college football. I mean, you've seen FSU and Jimbo Fisher fall off the map this year. It's tough to stay at that level. So you do have to pick things that are going to edge your players. They're going to make them feel like they have no room for error. This quote is just another one of those things and topics for Saban to use moving forward.
Was your second billion harder than your first billion? I mean, listen, I know this bonus baby in the NFL.
That second billion is still floating out there somewhere, buddy. I got to.
Yeah. All right, we got Benjamin Wool coming up in a few minutes. We'll talk about the Auburn Tigers with him. Let me remind you, that is Mike Johnson, the former Alabama All-American. My name is Brandon Adams. Thanks for being with us here today on AT&T SEC Country Live. AT&T, a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. Make the switch to AT&T Wireless DirecTV. They'll help you stay connected all season long. Let's move on. Look at item number 3 in our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. So a lot of talk about Dan Mullen and his potential of being interested in the Florida job. Some of this seems to contradict each other just a little bit. Now, we're going to have Brandon Walker later on today's show. We'll ask him about it. But let me start with what SB Nation reporters recently put out. They believe that Mullen was the top candidate for the Florida job. Here's what Stephen Godfrey, Alex Kirshner, kind of a team effort at SB Nation, kind of came up with. That Mississippi State head coach Dan Mullen is the clear early favorite among Florida's administration per multiple sources. So that's what Florida apparently wants, according to SB Nation, is Mullen in Gainesville. But if you believe the Jackson Clarion Ledger, maybe Mullen doesn't want to go back to Florida, because here's what one of their reporters recently wrote. Mullen enjoys his life in Starkville, and he's not eyeing other opportunities, sources close to the MSU program said. Now, the last sentence kind of catches my eye because Mullen has shown up as a potential candidate for every job opening for the last half decade. Yeah. I have a hard time believing that Mullen is not eyeing other opportunities. I think he is. But to go back to a topic we briefly touched on yesterday, is he eyeing the Florida opportunity? I think there's reason to believe that he is not. Is it fair to say that Florida wants Mullen, but Mullen doesn't want to come back to the place he was once offensive coordinator?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. When we talked about 3 years ago when the job came up to Jim McElwain, Dan Mullen was quoted as saying this is a lateral move, saying, moving across the SEC from one division to the other, and the Florida job is a lateral move. And his wife has come out and said things that, Florida fans' passion kind of turns them away. And listen, I think the biggest thing to talk about in this entire situation is how does Dan Mullen feel about Scott Strickland? If he loves working for Scott Strickland and thinks he's a great boss and a great AD, then the odds are that he might move down to Florida. I think when you add in Jimmy Sexton and all this and the buyout with Jim McElwain and them having the same agents, and you look at everything from afar, the odds are good that maybe Dan Mullen would look at this job. I just wonder how he feels about Scott Strickland. And some of the whispers behind the scenes have been that maybe he doesn't like him that much.
Well, I think that's probably fair to bring up, but I also think it's probably true that Scott Strickland, being a relatively new AD at Florida, he was at Mississippi State with Dan Mullen for a while there before, but relatively new at Florida, that the culture that it's in place at Florida is still largely built by Jeremy Foley, the old athletic director. Yes. And here's the thing I'd be really concerned about if I was Florida. Maybe the Florida job isn't as good as it once was or isn't as good as it should be now because of the culture that exists around Florida. I mean, think about what's happened here. You had Urban Meyer, who kind of went through a lot of dramatics on his way out of the door in 2010, and a lot of people questioned some of the things that he said about why he wanted to leave Florida. He was back coaching again in the blink of an eye at Ohio State. And you've got Jim McElwain, whose statements about the alleged death threats have been largely questioned, not unsubstantiated really at all. So you've got these two coaches, McElwain, who won 2 SEC East, Urban Meyer won 2 national championships, and on the way out the door, there's this weirdness associated with the job because apparently they weren't happy there, didn't like what they were doing. I think the Florida athletic department, it works very different than a lot of SEC athletic departments in that it's more about the all sports picture at Florida. They love being good at those non-revenue sports. But, at a place like Alabama, other place in the SEC, it's all about giving the football coach what he wants. Maybe the Florida coaching job is sort of affected by, negatively, by an athletic culture that just doesn't defer enough to the football coach.
I agree with you. And look, I answered this question a couple times this week. Look at Will Muschamp right now. He looks so happy. I mean, for the entire time he was at Florida, and he didn't get the job done, but he looked so stressed out. I mean, every time you saw Will Muschamp, it looked like his hair was turning gray and falling out. And so I think the Florida job, to me, is always going to be attractive to a lot of these candidates. Number one, because of the hot recruiting bread. Number two, because of the passion of the fans. And also the ability to win national championships. This is a place that's been proven you can go and win a national championship. There's not always job openings that have that ability. And so, I'm sure it's stressful and the fan level is passionate and they haven't been good since Urban Meyer, but you're always going to have that passion from the fans and you're going to have the ability to succeed. They're going to give you everything you need to succeed there.
Jackson Johnson has an interesting comment. He says, Dan, don't stay at Starkville. Go get that Florida money or that Tennessee money. Can you imagine for a moment, because Mullen's name has also been connected to the Tennessee job as well.
Yeah.
Can you imagine for a moment if Dan and Megan Mullen, we heard from Megan Mullen on this subject on our show yesterday, can you imagine if he did take another SEC job?
Yeah.
And it wasn't going back to Florida, the place he had coached before, for the athletic director he used to work with at Mississippi State. It was going to Knoxville to be the coach at Tennessee. Can you imagine what a big statement that would be if Mullen took an SEC job besides Florida? That would be an incredible statement on Mullen's part about who he did not want to work for and the place he didn't want to live.
Yeah, I think that would tell you all you need to know about Scott Strickland and their relationship together, because there has been reports, like I said, that back when they worked together at Mississippi State, maybe Dan Mullen didn't care for Scott Strickland that much.
Yeah.
And to me, this whole Jim McElwain thing, I don't know who's right and who's wrong, but it substantiates it a little bit. If you think about the fact that Jim McElwain felt like his family's life was threatened and he got death threats, and then Scott Strickland the next day steps out and said it's been unsubstantiated, to me, maybe there is a little bit to point to the fact that he doesn't always have his head coach's back.
We don't have time to get in this whole thing. I can't believe you believe McElwain on the death threat thing. I mean, listen,
why would the guy lie?
Listen, I try to be, because he wants people to feel sorry for him because he's not winning enough. He's got the 100-something worst offense in the country. I mean, listen, when I sit in this chair, I try to be like Mr. Newsy when I set these topics up. Unsubstantiated death threats. The truth is, I think he lied. It's just hard to say.
Come on. We've already seen death threats to Kevin Sumlin this year. What makes you think Florida fans would be any different than Texas A&M? I mean, I have a hard time believing Jim McElwain make it up to have people feel sorry for him. I don't know.
Can't
it's not the Jim McElwain I've ever known.
I cannot believe you believe him.
No, I 100% believe, 110% believe that he got death threats. Now, I don't know if it was verbal. I don't know if it was written to him in the mail. I don't know what it was. But I believe that if he said it,
you won't use the word exaggerated.
No, I don't think exaggerate is the right word. If somebody said, hey, I'm going to kill you, then that's not exaggerating it. I mean, if somebody yelled at his wife or at his kids, then I don't think that's exaggerating. I don't disbelieve him at all. I think he's 100% true.
Coming up in a moment, we're going to hear from Tennessee AD John Currie about his, at least for now, support of Tennessee coach Butch Jones. That's coming up later on AT&T SEC Country Live. For now, let's check in Auburn, Alabama. Let's get ready to say hello to Benjamin Wolk, who covers the Auburn Tigers and Auburn recruiting for SECCountry.com. And Ben, we got a lot to talk about, but can you talk to my boy here for a second? He's taken McElwain at face value on this. He may be the only guy in the SEC that believes McElwain on this story.
I mean, y'all get me started. I got to start talking about death threats. The first thing that you guys bring me in on.
Listen, we like to set you up for something hard, Ben.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I sort of see where Mike's coming from. Like, why would a guy lie about that? But I think that it also might be sort of what is your definition of death threats. So, if you're getting a phone call to your house where people are sort of threatening you and your family, it's one thing. If it's someone that's just saying something sort of ridiculous on Twitter, that might be a little different thing. I don't really know where I stand on the whole thing, but obviously the Florida administration, one way or another, was sort of done with the entire big picture of the Jim McElwain era.
Well, let me ask you this. When you look at Gus Malzahn, who, listen, a few weeks ago, he was kind of on the hot seat. Then he won some games. Now he lost LSU, won Arkansas again. It seems like it's sort of teetered back and forth here during the season. When you look at what's left for him the rest of the year, Texas A&M this Saturday, not a pushover game, even though Auburn's a pretty big favorite. The Georgia game obviously coming up in a couple of weeks. That's a game that Auburn needs to win. Alabama at the end of the season. When this tough stretch for Auburn is done, is Malzahn going to have coached well? Is his team going to have played well enough for him to be safe for 2018? I mean, is this still a story yet to be written in your mind?
I do. I mean, I think that this weekend against Texas A&M is definitely a must-win for Gus Malzahn's job security. Then you look ahead to Georgia and Alabama, who are the #1 and #2 team in the country. I mean, I know there's a lot of people in the Auburn fan base who feel like those, at least one of those is a must-win game just because, they've lost 6 in a row to those 2 teams. But it's hard to put a guy's job on the line and say you have to beat one of the number 1 or number 2 teams in the country. I do think that Auburn's got a good enough team. I think they've got the talent to, upset one of those 2 teams. They got both of them at home. So obviously if you beat Georgia or you beat Alabama, I do think that secures the job. If they end up going 8-4, if they beat A&M and then lose to Georgia and Alabama, I think that it creates the conversation. But then when you look at some of the other openings, Florida, probably Tennessee, probably Texas A&M, does Auburn really want to go into this coaching carousel this year with 3 other SEC jobs open that, you can make an argument one way or another that all 3 might be better job opportunities than Auburn? So, I mean, it's a fine line you've got to walk, but Auburn's coming off of a bye week. I think that you're probably going to see the best version of Auburn this weekend against Texas A&M. And then, you've got number 1 and number 2 coming on up, and it's not an easy task. I mean, beating Georgia and beating Alabama is always pretty tough for Auburn. But beating them when they might be the 2 best teams in the country, I mean, it's not something that you want to be coaching for your job on. But, I think that Auburn, we'll sort of see. I mean, I think that we're going to see early on in that Georgia game what kind of team Auburn still feels like it has. And, I think that sort of the way that they play those 2 games might be just as important as whether they win or whether they lose.
Auburn got some bad news today with running back Cameron Petway. We'll talk to you about that in just a moment. Before that, let me squeeze in one more about this coaching situation. Going back to the McElwain firing for a moment, how does Auburn stand to sort of gain an advantage in recruiting based on McElwain's departure here and some of the recruits that McElwain and Florida were trying to hold on to here? Are there some names that Auburn can reach up and grab, maybe getting involved with a running back like Dameon Pierce? I mean, is there a place that Auburn's looking to go here when it comes to some of these Florida commits now that McElwain's gone?
When it comes to Florida commits, I mean, you bring up Dameon Pierce, who is someone that Auburn, I mean, early in the cycle, I mean, they saw him as maybe the best running back that they were recruiting, and were very surprised when he committed to Florida over the summer. With Asa Martin already committed to Auburn now, I mean, it would be sort of a dangerous game to go recruit Dameon Pierce. Still, I mean, I'm sure they'll stay in communication, but the likelihood of bringing in both Dameon Pierce and Asa Martin doesn't really seem that high. And with Alabama still recruiting Asa Martin, it would be a very dangerous game to try and recruit Dameon Pierce and then potentially lose out on Asa Martin because of that. And Asa Martin's and Dameon Pierce has as well, but Asa Martin's had an exceptional senior season. The one recruit that I think that it probably helps Auburn the most with isn't even a commit. It's Richard Jubinor, who I've talked about a lot in the past as someone who I felt was an Auburn lean. But his 3 schools that he really had it down to were Florida, Tennessee, and Auburn. Obviously, Florida's already made a coaching change. Tennessee, it looks like things will probably trend in that direction. And then with Auburn, you don't really know yet. But when it comes to what school he's most comfortable with, that's certainly Auburn. He had a really strong relationship with the Florida coaching staff, so it'll be interesting to see which of those assistants remain on the new staff. But I think that in terms of the fact that he's only visited Florida 1 time and really his connection to Florida was through the coaching staff, I think that really revs up Auburn's chances of landing Richard Jubinor, who I felt that they were probably going to land anyways, but I think that this sort of was just the icing on the cake.
Ben, let's talk about Cam Petway for a minute, too, because I went on the record during the summer, back in July, saying I thought that Auburn might have the best running back duo in the league. I mean, when you talk about Cam Petway and Kerryon Johnson, they haven't really been on the field a ton together this year. I mean, now with the news about Cam Petway's shoulder injury, where does this leave the running back stable at Auburn?
Well, you got to feel for Cam Petway. I mean, he's been dealing with so many different injuries over the course of the last year. He was a guy who, could have left probably early for the NFL draft, decided to come back for another season. I mean, it sort of makes you think he's probably going to be back for another year at Auburn unless NFL scouts have liked what they've already seen him put on tape. As for Auburn's running back position, I mean, I guess they have the good fortune of having Kerryon Johnson, who is playing as one of the best running backs in the league right now. I still believe he leads the nation in rushing touchdowns. But, Auburn didn't really have a ton of depth behind Cameron Petway and Kerryon Johnson at running back. I mean, they've got Devin Barrett, who's a freshman, who's looked good at times, but they've really used him more in the passing game than the running game. The coaching staff has admitted at times that they've had hesitations using Cam Martin just because of his size, and they felt like they needed some bigger bodies running in between the tackles than a guy like Cam Martin. And then they've got Malik Miller, who is that big body type of guy, but virtually gets no reps. So, I mean, it is, you don't want to be going into this stretch of the season against Texas A&M, against Georgia and against Alabama with only being able to rely on Kerryon Johnson. But the reality is that's sort of the situation that they've gotten themselves into just because of the amount of reps that they've given some of the other guys earlier in the year. Definitely a detrimental loss. I mean, Auburn's just had a lot of misfortune with over the last 2 seasons being able to have Cam Petway and Kerryon Johnson healthy at the same time, and it's happening all over again. Kind of a nightmare scenario for Auburn.
Hey, Ben, always great stuff. Thanks for being with us on AT&T SEC Country Live. Hope you have a happy Halloween. I don't know if you're dressing up or not, but hope you have a happy Halloween. We'll look forward to speaking to you on our program again very soon.
Awesome, guys. Happy Halloween.
Good stuff there from Benjamin Walt covering Auburn recruiting for SECCountry.com. As promised, now let's dive back into our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. We look at the Tennessee Vols and kind of an interesting statement made on a radio show on Tuesday night from, or I should say Monday night, from Tennessee Athletic Director John Currie about his support for Tennessee coach Butch Jones. Here is what Currie has to say, that you have to make decisions you truly believe are best for our program. I believe that supporting our staff and supporting our players, getting ready for the Southern Miss game, is the best thing I can do for our football program right now. That's a snippet of a larger statement that Currie made, essentially saying that he's supporting Butch Jones right now. He's not at least publicly looking to replace him. I ask you what I asked you yesterday. What is going on here?
This is deflection at its best. And I thought it was so funny. One of the things that John Currie said when he gave the statement was that his dad was a surgeon, and there was no problem you can't make worse by operating. And
that's a good thing to also bring up there.
It was a good thing that I mean, I don't understand. I don't understand what he's doing. I know that you feel that way. You don't want to dive in and make the situation worse. But guess what? You need to operate on something if something's going to kill you. And right now, Butch Jones is killing this Tennessee football program. I mean, he really is.
That's a good line, yeah.
And I don't understand what the direction is. I don't understand what the positive is of keeping him in that coaching seat through the end of the year. And you're losing the fan base. You have a hashtag on Twitter that says empty Neyland, and yet you don't want to make a move in your first-year AD. I think it's a bad look.
Well, how about this? David Melton, from a comment in the comment section a little early in the show, said that he believes, and I've actually heard a few other people sort of tweeting this as well, that if Jones goes to a bowl, he's staying.
No, there's no way.
That if he can get to a postseason game, he's staying at Tennessee. And, I mean, is it really possible that all he would have to do is go to a bowl to keep his job there?
No. I don't believe that. I don't see how you believe it. I mean, think about this now. They are 5-point favorites at home against Southern Miss this weekend. I mean,
that's crazy.
If anything needed to tell you the story of what's going on at Tennessee, it's that line, and that's the perception. Then you're going to back that up with Missouri. They might be underdogs to a Missouri team that we've talked a bunch about this year about being the basement of the SEC. Then you've got LSU coming to town. And then you're going to end your season against Vanderbilt, who you lost to. And I just don't see the upswing in any of this schedule. I don't think they get to a bowl game. I don't even think that we need to even discuss that because I don't know how they get to a bowl game. But it's a topic of conversation, and to me, it's a joke that it's even a topic.
So, I mean, I tried to do some research on this morning. I mean, this has got to be about money, right? In one of two ways. Either by dragging this thing out, he hopes that Butch Jones wants to resign, which would therefore, I mean, technically if Jones resigned, he wouldn't be owed any buyout. But by his desire to resign, maybe he agrees to a smaller buyout because he doesn't want to be the dead man walking that John Currie's forcing him to be. Or maybe there is some date somewhere in this contract where you can knock another year off this buyout. All of a sudden that's reduced. But, I mean, if this really is about money, you're sacrificing your 2018 recruiting class in order to try to save a little bit of money.
Yes.
And I cannot think of another reason why John Currie would allow this thing to stretch on the way that it is, unless it was about reducing the what is believed to be around $9 million, somewhere in the $8 million, $9 million range of what Butch Jones would be owed. I can't understand what else this would be about, but you cannot put a price tag on missing out on a recruiting cycle. With the December early signing period, that's what Tennessee would be doing.
No, I agree. And to me, you got to get somebody in there soon enough, right after the season ends, that can kind of wrap up that signing class together. They can spend 3 weeks trying to get those Tennessee recruits onto campus and allowing them to possibly meet a new staff after that last game. I don't think there's any danger right now to me that Tennessee is going to make it to a bowl game, and I think that's really where the concern lies. I know that somebody came out a couple of weeks ago and said if Tennessee doesn't make a bowl game, that automatically makes the buyout a little bit lower. If that's the case, then I don't know how much it is, but I think we're wasting time. Just let's get to the end of the season. Let's fire the guy and let's get on with it. I don't know what you are trying to do if you're John Currie, though. I mean, honestly, we come in here all the time and talk about football, and I try to have takes on everything. I try to have reasons. I don't understand it at all. I mean, I'm lost on it. I honestly am.
So I'll figure out where this thing is heading. Let's move on for now to item number 5 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And I saw a really interesting number on Twitter. We'll show you the tweet here on the screen as it relates to Georgia running back Sony Michel, a guy that's not even the Georgia starter, but in comparison to the Heisman frontrunner right now, Saquon Barkley. How about this? Barkley against Power 5 defenses. He's the Heisman frontrunner. 582 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 114 carries. Sony Michel, the Georgia backup, 542 yards, same number of touchdowns, but on just 58 carries, essentially half as many, because Sony's sharing carries with Nick Chubb and DeAndre Swift, among others, including Elijah Holyfield and Brian Herrien. How surprised are you? And by the way, it's at UGA Born and Raised who had this on Twitter. Good for him for kind of compiling this research here. But how surprised are you by that number of Sony Michel in comparison to the Heisman frontrunner, Saquon Barkley? To me, it shows you how effective Georgia's been running the football this year.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think that you can look at Georgia. You can also look at a couple guys from Alabama in that light, too. I saw the numbers on them a week ago that were pretty incredible. And well, to me, though, this points back to the problem with the Heisman. I think you get this, this love affair with these different players. And that guy is the face of the Penn State team. And he's a guy that Penn State's been in the top 10, top 5 all year long. And he's gone out and performed, and he looks like a dynamic player. But when you break down the numbers, I mean, there's a lot of other running backs in the country that have way better numbers. And when you look at Bryce Love right now, 1,300 rushing yards that guy has. And he's been as explosive as anybody. He just doesn't get the exposure out there on the West Coast. And to me, this day and age in the Heisman, we tend to fall in love with these guys. We tend to fall in love with these top 5 players that are the best player on their team, that are the bell cow running back, and they're not always the best player in the country, and we tend to give the Heisman to them.
And listen, I'm not telling you that Sony Michel is supposed to be the Heisman Trophy winner. I'm just saying he's having maybe a better season than some realize. And as Kirby Smart said this week, it's not just on the field, it's his off-field leadership as well. When it comes to Kirby Smart's coaching career, he hasn't seen many like what Michel brings to the table. Take a listen. All right, we'll get the Sony Michel audio taken care of there in a moment, but Kirby Smart was bragging about the leadership that Michel brings to the table and just how much this is a guy that both on and off the field is a guy that's really doing it for Georgia. When you think about Georgia being 8-0 and in this college football playoff conversation, really on its way to clinching the SEC East here pretty soon, it's senior leadership like what Michel and others brought to the table that have really enabled that for Georgia.
Yeah, I agree. And like I said, I compiled some of the numbers and I looked at some of the numbers. Damian Harris actually has a little bit higher, Power 5 yards per carry against Power 5 teams, but he's the starter. I mean, he's the bell cow back for Alabama right now, getting the bulk of the carries. Sony Michel, not so much. I mean, Nick Chubb's out rushing him by 150 yards, and they also don't have a dual-threat quarterback like Jalen Hurts is at Alabama. So it's incredibly impressive. I mean, you saw front and center in the explosion he had against Florida last week, his ability to outrun those defenders in the secondary. That's what can turn an offense from good to great, and I think that's what's really put this Georgia offense over the top.
Let me let you hear Kirby Smart talking about Sony Michel here.
Yeah, I mean, I've been around some defensive players that are similar to that. I haven't been around a lot of running backs that have that personality that he has, that he's not afraid to step up and be a leader. Sometimes running backs just don't like that role. They want to carry the ball. They don't want to be asked to stand up in front of people and have to get on them if they need to or do the things they have to do. I think he exhibits his leadership through his special teams play, through his carries, through his unselfishness. So when he speaks, people listen because they take pride in the fact that he gives all the effort himself. So when he speaks, everybody wants to listen, and he's been a great asset for us.
So good stuff there from Georgia coach Kirby Smart talking about Sony Michel. He calls him a great asset, and certainly, as you mentioned, that entire Georgia running arsenal has been a great asset for the Dogs thus far this season. Let me move on here to item number 6 in our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Early in the show, we talked about the potential of some LSU bulletin board for Alabama.
Right.
Maybe Nick Saban surprisingly gave LSU some bulletin board material here as well, because linebacker Devon White, who's having a sensational season, I mean, he's among the best players in the SEC,
yes.
I think you'd have to say. He kind of retold a story from his recruitment about what Nick Saban told him would happen if he went to LSU instead of going to Alabama. Well, ultimately, White did make the decision to go to Baton Rouge, but not until he got a warning from Saban. Devon White said this week, Coach Saban was like, if you go there, we're just going to have to beat you every year. I'm like, wow, he really said that? Now, none of us have ever been through the recruiting process. So only you have been through the recruiting process in this show to kind of explain this. How common is what Saban says there from other coaches of, if you go to this school, you know we're just going to beat you every year?
I don't know that coaches normally come out and say those types of things. I mean, they might hint at it. They might say, well, we've been pretty good against them, or you're not going to have as much success down there. We've got proven coaches that can do a lot better things here. But I don't know that coaches normally come out and say this. And listen, this is Nick Saban, who might go down as one of the greatest recruiters of all time when you talk about the classes that he's put together. So maybe that is what has gotten him over the edge, the fact that he does have the ability to kind of brag on his program. And when I heard these words this week, I thought this was the typical example of LSU fans are going to absolutely hate this, and Alabama fans are going to absolutely love it.
That's a great point.
It is like, this is going to be the most polarizing statement you could ever make. And, Devon White's career has turned out great. He's turned out to be a great player down at LSU. They've done good things while he's been there, and I think this is just another thing for him to kind of carry personally on his shoulders going into this game.
I like the comment from Steve Weaver, who says not only did he say it, he's actually doing, and that's true, and that's really the reason why Alabama fans like Saban saying that so much, is he's putting his money where his mouth is. Man, hearing this quote from Devon White about Saban and looking at the track record in which Alabama has kind of lived up to Saban's prophecy here, it just reminds you just how big of a rivalry this used to be. These two teams once played for a national championship. And really since then, it's been all Alabama in this rivalry. And it's really hard to believe that LSU, a program that was at the top of the heap not all that long ago, the fact they really don't have much in the way of bragging rights when it comes to the game against Alabama.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, this is the one program that when I was in school, when I left school, I guess in 2010, 2011, I really thought LSU and Les Miles were the one team every year that were going to stand up to Nick Saban. They were, we lost against LSU in 2007. Alabama lost to LSU 2010, 2011, a regular season, and then beat them in the national championship and haven't lost to them since. And so I think it is interesting to see how these programs have kind of weaved and turned since that 2011 season. And Nick Saban, you're right. He's completely backed up his words right now, and he looks to continue that streak this weekend.
So listen, if I were to ask you, big point spread, you got about 3 touchdowns right now.
Right.
Are you thinking LSU covers that number? I wouldn't imagine you think LSU's going to win outright on Saturday. But if you want to do an early look ahead, are you thinking that LSU kind of, do they stay close here on Saturday?
Yeah, I think they do. I think they absolutely cover the number. I think 21.5 is a little bit too much. I mean, I can imagine, if Alabama's a success running the ball and they're able to open it up in the second half and kind of get into that running back depth and really start to pull that out in the second half, maybe they cover the late touchdown. But I'm thinking more of like a 10-point game. I'm thinking like 21-10, 21-14, somewhere in that range. Because listen, like I said all offseason, this is the one team athletically. Now, they might not have the depth. They might not always have the scheme. But athletically, this is a team that can always stand up to Alabama. They're going to force Jalen to throw the ball, and right now their secondary and their pass defense is as good as anybody in the country. They're going to have those corners locked up. The safeties are playing well right now, so I don't think it's a slam dunk that Alabama comes out and wins by 3 touchdowns. I think it's going to be a very close game.
That is Mike Johnson. My name is Brandon Adams. This is AT&T's SEC Country Live. AT&T, a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. All right, coming up in just a moment, here's what I need for you to do. You played the game. You know Jim McElwain. There is something that McElwain did this week on his way out the door at Florida that I think is really strange. Now, you can tell me coming up if you think this is as strange as I think it is. We'll do that in just a minute. Before that, though, let me also remind you that earlier in the show we talked about the possibility of Dan Mullen leaving Mississippi State, going to take a job like Florida. How much of a possibility is that? Does Florida want him? Does Mullen want to leave Mississippi State? Well, let's check in with a guy right now who knows Starkville, Mississippi really well. He does our Mississippi State podcast each and every day for SECCountry.com. He is Brandon Walker. He joins us here on AT&T's SEC Country Live. And I guess, Brandon, let me ask you this and cut right to the chase. Do you think that Mullen, the coach that you cover on a daily basis, is a candidate for the open Florida job right now?
I do believe Dan Mullen should be a candidate at the University of Florida, and he probably is a candidate at the University of Florida. I do not believe Dan Mullen would go to the University of Florida to be their head coach.
So you don't think he would go there? And is this about, I want to bring in Mike on this as well, but is this about the bad feeling that we played the audio yesterday of Megan Mullen, his wife? Are there just bad vibes left over from their time at Florida? Is that why you don't think he would leave?
I think it's a combination of a lot of things. I think first you got to look at what he has in Starkville. He has everything he wants. He built the program. It's his program. He doesn't have to answer to anybody, really. He can recruit the guys he wants to recruit. He doesn't have to answer to the Bull Gators or whatever they call them down there. Doesn't have to answer to anybody. But, yeah, he was the offensive coordinator at Florida, and I'm not sure the fans at Florida, I'm not sure everything rubbed the Mullins the right way during that time. I'm not sure the relationship between Strickland and Mullen is good enough to lure Mullen to Florida. I'm not saying Dan Mullen will never leave Starkville. I think he will eventually. I just don't think he's going to Florida. Let's look at it, Brandon. This is the third time in Mullen's tenure the Florida job has come open. He didn't take it the first two. Why would he take it this time?
You know, I thought you wrote something interesting on Twitter earlier today, kind of caught my eye, or maybe it was yesterday, when you said Ole Miss fans should actually hope that Dan Mullen doesn't take the job in Florida, that maybe that would put Mississippi State above them on kind of that totem pole of searching for a coach. Why do you feel that way? Is it the sanction at Ole Miss, and how do you kind of defend that statement?
It's 100% the sanctions. Listen, the Ole Miss job, the Mississippi State job, you could get fans in this room that would fight each other to the death, trying to say this job is better, that job is better. But I know right now that Dan Mullen has a 2018 team that will have 18 starters back, that will have Nick Fitzgerald back, that is probably going to finish 9-3 this season. State's going to be loaded for next year, and Ole Miss is starting from zero. They could be in a 2, 3, 4, 5-year rebuilding mode. They could see as many as 30 or 40 scholarships come off the board. You don't know what you're going to have at Ole Miss. Right now, and on October 31st, 2017, the Mississippi State job is a much more attractive job than the Ole Miss job.
But I want to go back to something you were talking about a moment ago, the fact that Mullen may not be looking to leave Starkville right now. I can buy you that he's not looking for the Florida job, maybe. I actually don't think he'd be a very good fit for the job. I said yesterday I think he would actually fail if he took the job. But the notion of him not looking to go anywhere, I mean, why does his name show up on the short list for every job that comes available? That can't always just be because other teams are interested in him. He's had to put some feelers out in the past. I mean, are we really sure that kind of stuff is over, that he's not going to, through his agent, kind of float his name in the public the way that obviously it seems to have happened in the past?
Well, agents can float your name for whatever you want. If you never say yes, it doesn't really matter. If you never really leave, it doesn't matter. My counter question to you, Brandon, is have you ever stayed somewhere, anywhere in your life for 9 years where you weren't happy? Have you ever stayed somewhere 9 seasons where you didn't think the job was right, where you didn't think it was good? No, Dan Mullen has been there 9 years. He went to #1. He went to the Orange Bowl. He has 4 9-win seasons. You got to believe he's had opportunities to leave Starkville, and he hasn't done it yet. So I don't know. I think there will come a time, there will come a day when Dan Mullen leaves Starkville, and everybody will say, see, I told you he wanted to get out of there. Well, he's been there 9 years. I mean, eventually, yeah, he leaves maybe for a Notre Dame, maybe for a Penn State. I don't know. I just don't think it's Florida. I don't think it's Tennessee. I don't think it's any of the SEC jobs that can get him out of Starkville.
Listen, Brandon, don't tell me about staying somewhere you're unhappy. I've been sitting next to this guy for, about a year. I know what it's like to show up and be miserable somewhere. I mean, Megan Mullen in Gainesville, I know exactly what her pain is. I'm sitting next to this guy every single day.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I understand, but it really is a good point to think about when you say, oh, Mullen's been trying to get out. If he's been trying to get out as hard as people say, he would have gotten out. He could have used that 2014 season where he went to #1, where he went to the Orange Bowl. He could have used that to get out if he truly wanted out. I just don't see the desperation to get out that other people see.
SECCountry.com, the SEC Country Mississippi State podcast each and every day. Brandon Walker, great job by you. Thanks for being on the program. We look forward to speaking to you soon.
All right, thanks, Brandon. Good talk, Mike.
All right, let's get back to our AT&T SEC Country Live first and 10 and item number 7. Now, I told you, I think this is strange, but I didn't play the game. You can probably look at me and tell that. You did, and you know Jim McElwain. So tell me if you think this is weird. McElwain, I guess, never addressed the full Florida team on his way out the door. Apparently, he talked to some of the players, but not all of them. How do we know that he talked to some of the players? Well, because of what Duke Dawson, for instance, said. Let me let you hear a little bit of audio with Duke Dawson in an exchange with reporters talking about the departure of McElwain and letting it be known that he did have a chance to hear a little bit from McElwain. Here's Duke Dawson.
How'd you first find out Sunday?
I seen it on the internet, but at first I really didn't believe it. So, once I got here and we had the meeting, it was true.
What time was that meeting?
5.
Have you seen Coach Mack since?
He came and spoke to us.
When was that?
I just say a little bit after practice.
So there he says, hey, we did get a chance to hear from Jim McElwain a little bit after practice. But apparently some Florida players did not get that same opportunity. Let me let you hear from Brandon Powell, a Florida wide receiver, who when asked about reporters said, you know what, no, I did not get a chance to speak to Jim McElwain. Here's Powell.
Has Mac talked to you guys yet? A chance to say anything to you, the players?
Nah, I'm just waiting on Coach Shannon. That's their job to do that, I guess. So I'm just worrying about practice right now.
Disappointed at all that Mac didn't say goodbye, or?
Oh no, we go through something like that. I don't blame him. I mean, he probably needs some time off to himself. But I mean, if you be fired, would you? I'm pretty sure you wouldn't want to go talk to anybody right then. But I mean, that's just up to him.
So he says then, hey, would you want to go talk to somebody if you just got fired? That's what Powell says, but it does seem like a football coach owes it to his players, especially when so many of his players complain about hearing about the McElwain firing from social media. So apparently, based on some reports from some writers, the way this all unfolds, because it's sort of hard to even figure out the math on this, McElwain was at practice on Monday. Some players saw him there at the end, and they sort of walked over to him, and it kind of turned into this unofficial conversation. Not a, hey guys, take a knee, I want to say something to you. They actually went to him, and he started talking to some of the players, but not all of them. Does he owe it more to these players, many of which he brought to Florida, some of which he inherited, but the guys he coached for the last couple of years, does he owe it to them to give a speech before he leaves?
No, I think it's an interesting way of asking the question, first of all. I think you can owe it to them, and I think all coaches would love the opportunity, but they don't usually get it. I think just looking at this as a corporate structure, and I mentioned this to you, this is so strange. I mean, can you imagine the CEO of your company being fired and then coming and hanging out in the elevator lobby and just telling everybody bye on their way out, on their way out the building for work that day? I mean, it's so strange to think about Jim McElwain lining up and having the speech, and I thought back to when Mike Shula was fired when I was in college. That was interesting as well, because we actually played the Iron Bowl, had a week off before Thanksgiving, went home for Thanksgiving, got back, met with Mike Shula, and then he was fired after the meeting.
All right, let me ask you. So when Shula got fired, this is a great question. So did he come in and talk to the whole team and said, hey guys, you know what? I'm not going to be your coach anymore. Did he speak to your team?
No, he spoke to us before he was fired, right before he was fired. And I think the AD was standing there knowing he was about to fire him and was just saying, and Mike Shula's message was clear. It was like, look, we've got to get back to the drawing board. We've got to get a lot better. We're going to play in a bowl game this year. We need to make strides on offense. And then, you get a text a couple hours later that Mike Shula's been fired, and the news hits in the morning. So I think this is really, really interesting. I think this is the only time I've ever heard of this as far as head coaching goes.
So it's not, in your viewpoint, common for a coach to give a farewell speech to a team when he gets fired?
Not if he's not going to finish out the season, or not if there's something else going on, or he's been invited back. I think the fact that this happened and it wasn't like a formal thing, I think makes this one of the strangest post-firing stories I've ever heard.
Yeah, the fact that he's even at practice. You actually brought this up before the show, and I hadn't thought about this, but it's a good point. When somebody gets fired, they are escorted off the premises by security, and they're not allowed back on. And apparently, according to Duke Dawson, McElwain's just at practice. What is he doing?
Yeah, he just showed up to get all of his rings and stuff out of the head coaching office. I mean,
frankly, I hate to be this way. This is not like a character assessment of Jim McElwain. It's just sort of a statement about life in 2017. Given the WikiLeaks scandal, I mean, would you let a guy that you just fired, and for those who don't know, a Wake Forest coach was going around and just basically putting the whole game plan on blast? I mean, would you allow McElwain to be there, given the fact that he might have like a legitimate grievance?
No, I wouldn't at all. And as a matter of fact, I wondered today on Twitter, I was like, what are the odds that Saban gives Jim McElwain a call? And it's like, hey, come hang out with us. Be a new offensive analyst like Sarkisian was last year.
Yeah.
I mean, here's a guy who's got the keys to that entire Florida playbook right now and knows everything that's going on with that team. And you're letting him hang out. I think it is one of the most interesting post-firing things that I've seen happen in the SEC in quite some time.
Yeah, that's really good. Josh Engelbrecht says, I have to say that Coach Mack was a good fit. This year wasn't, but the last 2 years were good, if not great. I think that's the problem, though. They were good, not great. And Florida expects great. And when it wasn't great for McElwain, he just had a tendency to get a little weird. The thing we're talking about right now is more weirdness. His reaction to the shark video, that was somebody else that looked like Jim McElwain, but McElwain took it so seriously. It's like everything with him was just weird.
Well, and I understand some of the circumstances surrounded. I just don't think he was a good fit down in Florida. I don't think he worked well with Scott Strickland. I think when you looked at the record the last couple of years, the case can be made that, yes, he was a good coach. I think he's a very good situational coach. I don't know that right now offensively that his offense fits what Florida needs. And I think that that's why he was out, because you can look at it and say, yeah, they went to Atlanta the last couple of years, but it was built on Jeff Collins' defense, not Jim McElwain's offense. He was brought there to develop a quarterback and to make that offense better, and it's just not something he was able to get done.
Steve Weaver says maybe they'll do a 30 for 30 one day on why everyone wants out of Gainesville. Maybe so, and certainly it seems like there have been some people that have wanted out of Florida here as of late. For now, though, let's move on and look at item number 8 on our AT&T SEC Country Life First and 10 list. And one of the names that has come up for Tennessee, there's even been these wild internet rumors about Tennessee willing to pay upwards of $10 million a season to bring Jon Gruden to the Vols. We know there's a long-standing tradition of Jon Gruden rumors anytime Tennessee's got a coaching situation open. Well, this week, or in the last few days, Gruden was asked about coming back to coaching. He was doing an interview with DenverBroncos.com, the official site of the NFL team, and at the end of the interview, the reporter kind of sneaks in a question about not just the Chiefs-Broncos game, but also about Gruden and his desire to coach again. I don't know what we take from this, but here's what Gruden said.
I know that you enjoy the job in the booth. You ever get that itch, though, to get back out there on the coaching side?
I draw plays every day. Who knows what life will bring? I haven't lost a game, though, in a few years, so I got that going for me.
Yeah, pretty good with ESPN, huh?
Yeah, thanks. You never know. We'll see what happens, but we're in for a great game.
So he says you never know what's going to happen, still likes to draw up plays. I mean, most of that sound like the sort of pre-programmed stuff that you just sort of say, hey, I ain't lost a game in years. That's a lot of corny, pre-programmed stuff. But I will say that if Gruden, who's got to be smart enough to know these rumors are out there, if he either wanted to politely squash those or if he legitimately believes he's never going to coach again, that's the opportunity to say, oh, coaching, man, I don't want to do that. I want to be a broadcaster. That's the time to say it. The fact that he doesn't, I take to mean that he is open to coaching again.
Well, it could mean that. I definitely think that's a possibility, and I don't know if it's even at Tennessee. Maybe he's looking at another NFL job. Maybe he doesn't want people to think that he's not interested in coaching at all, and then his name stops coming up in coaching rumors. I think that also there might be part of him looking at ESPN kind of leveraging this deal, saying, hey, you know what, they want to give me $10 million a year to walk out of the Monday Night Football booth. Is there any way y'all can come off an extra $1 million and maybe we can make this all happy in the end? I don't see it happening. I don't understand why he would come off a cushy 2-day-a-week job at ESPN for $6 million a year to go recruit 17-year-old kids out of high school and try to rebuild a Tennessee program. Maybe he's got that itch. Maybe it's just the football coach hit him. Maybe he wants to mentor young guys. I can see
competitive fight.
I could see all those things happening. I could see you saying, yeah, he's a football coach. He wants to mentor these guys and kind of welcome himself back into the coaching circle. I just don't know if this is the setup. I don't know if this is the place. I don't know why Gruden would do it right now.
So here's the thing for me. It's either one of two things that have to be true. Either he does want to coach again. He's letting it be known that he's kind of out there. Maybe, as Clay Travis and others have written, maybe ESPN can't afford Monday Night Football anymore, and that's going to leave Gruden looking for a job and maybe going back to coaching. The timing would be right for that. That's one possibility. The other possibility is he just likes courting the attention. If he's courting the attention at the expense of Butch Jones, it makes him a bad guy. I mean, I said the other day on our show, he knew when he went to the game in Knoxville that he was going to be on TV and get attention for that. If he wasn't interested in the Tennessee job and he was just doing that to kind of flirt and see who flirts back, that's a despicable move. And Gruden is a bad guy if that's what
I told you on the show, this is a guy who heads up this thing called the Fired Football Coaches of America.
Yeah.
And here he is showing up at a game when he knows a guy's on a hot seat. I was with you. I didn't think it was a good look at all for him. I know that his son goes to Tennessee and he's just visiting for the weekend, but to make his presence so publicly known, I thought was a bad look for him. I still don't see it. I don't see the tie of why Jon Gruden would take over this program right now. He said no to this job a few years back. There's a possibility that he says no to it again. But it looks to me like Tennessee is going to make the offer and try to get as much money as they can.
Terrence Collins says Gruden's going to bring in a lot of recruits where he become a coach again. Stephen John Spivey says no way Gruden goes back to coaching. So that's sort of both sides of that. Let me ask you one quick final question on the subject. We talked earlier in the show about the weirdness of Tennessee AD John Curry and how he's handling the Butch Jones situation. If all of this is just a precursor to hiring Gruden, big high-profile name, does that forgive some of the strangeness of right now?
I don't think so. To me, I feel like you have to keep everybody informed. And right now he's doing it behind the scenes. And I think it's because Butch Jones is still the head coach is the reason he's working behind the scenes. I don't have any doubt that, listen, John Curry knows he's going to fire Butch Jones. He's working behind the scenes right now to try to make this as seamless as possible. But all you're doing is keeping your players, your recruits, your fan base, everybody guessing right now what's going to happen. Why not fire Butch Jones and say, hey, you know what, we're going after Jon Gruden. I don't see what the downside is to that right now. Right now you're just sending Butch Jones out to be favored by 5 points against Southern Miss at home, and now your fans don't even want to come to the game. So what's the upside? Even if you do hire Gruden after this entire mess is over, I still think it's a bad look on John Curry that he hasn't done something sooner.
That's well said. Item number 9 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. If you believe some analysts, like Joel Klatt from Fox Sports, Gruden wouldn't even be the best available coach for one of these opening jobs. According to Klatt, he thinks it's actually one of the names that's showing up on Florida's list right now, Scott Frost. Former Nebraska player, current UCF coach, who's got the Golden Knights here performing pretty well. Here's a little bit of what Klatt recently said on Fox Sports about why he thinks that Frost is such a desirable candidate for a school like Florida, or I guess maybe even Tennessee. Here's a little bit from Klatt.
My number one coaching candidate out there is Scott Frost. at UCF. Scott Frost has it all. This guy has played for Bill Walsh, Tom Osborne, Bill Parcells, Bill Belichick, Jon Gruden, and Monty Kiffin. Then he goes into the coaching ranks. Did he start on the offensive side? Nope. He started on the defensive side. Then he comes back to the offensive side. Guess who he coaches under? Chip Kelly. This guy has it all.
I don't know. I mean, here's my problem with Frost. If he were to take the job that's open right now is Florida, and he coaches in the state of Florida. Now, Frost may rather be the Nebraska coach, but nonetheless, for now, it's Frost to Florida that we'll consider. That's a total recruiting overhaul. Smaller offensive lineman. It's a different offense. And look at who's dominating the SEC. It's Alabama, who does speed it up and play a little more spread than they used to, but it's still Alabama with the power running game. And Georgia's dominating the East, doing exactly what Alabama's done. I mean, isn't 2 teams dominating the league enough of a blueprint to say, you know, Scott Frost with his cute little Oregon offense is not what the SEC is going to be dominated by?
No, I think he'd be a great coach in the SEC. I look at it and I see a place like Florida, I see a place like Tennessee, places that offenses have struggled. Guess what you do? You go to the points per game that are being scored by teams in the FBS, and you say UCF is number 1 in points per game right now, number 1 in offense. And even that, they had a game canceled early in the year because of the hurricane. The problem for me when you look at Florida and you look at Tennessee, any other job in the SEC is, when is this guy going to go to Nebraska? Is Mike Riley going to get fired this year? Is he going to make it through the season? Or is Scott Frost going to wind up in Nebraska a year from now, 2 years from now? I think he'd be a great coach. I just don't know that he's a fit at the SEC right now. I think you have to have some long-term suggestions if you're at Tennessee and at Florida. And right now, Scott Frost to me would be a 1-year loaner until he goes to Nebraska.
What if I told you this, though? Nebraska's days of being a major program are done. There are no high school kids that play in freezing cold Nebraska. And the pipeline to Calibraska, where they used to bring in all those players from California back in the Tom Osborne era, that's kind of been chopped up by all the teams out west who are kind of taking their own players. I mean, you can't get players in Nebraska anymore. This is not 1994. I mean, maybe he looks at the writing on the wall and says, you know what? No one can ever be Tom Osborne at Nebraska. I'll hang my diploma on the wall, but I'm going to coach somewhere else.
Well, I think that's a possibility. But I mean, if you ask me, if Alabama was nothing 20 years from now and I happen to be a football coach, I would go back to Alabama and try to resuscitate that program. And I think a lot of coaches feel that way when they go back to their alma mater. Kirby Smart's that way. Bear Bryant said the same thing when he went back to Alabama. It's just how you feel. It's where you came from. You're an alum of there. You always want them to be on top. And when you see them struggling, it does hurt you week in and week out. So I'm saying, I know that he's a good look coach, and I know that SEC teams are going to look at him, and I know that he looks like a good fit at Florida right now because he's over there in Orlando. I just know that at some point in the next few years, that guy is going to be a Nebraska head coach, and I think he's going to be good at it.
Item number 10 on our AT&T SEC Country Live, a game we have not talked about from Saturday, was the big come-from-behind win for Arkansas against Ole Miss. A big deal for the Hogs, maybe not when the final records are tabulated, but on Saturday night was pretty fun. A piece of evidence that shows just how true that is the celebration that was captured by video in the Hogs locker room when it was all said and done. Take a look at how much fun the Arkansas players are having after this game on Saturday. And you know what? For me, this is a celebration that's justified for coming from behind and beating Ole Miss the way they did. I love these locker room videos for that reason, because these guys, even in the midst of a terrible season, are still working just as hard at practice as they always did. I feel like they deserve this celebration on Saturday.
I don't think there's any doubt about that. I mean, you're talking about a team. Listen, what were they down? 3 touchdowns in the first half, and all of a sudden score a couple touchdowns to get close with, at halftime. This is a team whose head coach is clearly on the hot seat right now, who has underperformed in terms of what they thought they were going to be able to do this year. They just haven't played well. And I think that with a backup quarterback and Cole Kelly in, to be able to come back in this game and beat an Ole Miss team that you probably should have been beaten from the get-go, I think it was like more relief than it was happiness. I think they got in the locker room and were so relieved that this is what they were doing on camera. And I love it. I mean, they still got a tough stretch ahead when you look at the remainder of their schedule, but this is a win they can celebrate for 1 week.
All right, it's AT&T's SEC Country Live. My name is Brandon Denham. That's Mike Johnson, former Alabama All-American. AT&T, proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. And now, speaking of AT&T, let's get ready to do our AT&T look ahead. The big TV show on tonight, 7 p.m. Eastern Time on ESPN. The college football playoff rankings will be released. Now, we started the show by saying there'll probably be room for debate with the SEC teams involved. Maybe Georgia ranked number 1. I assume that Alabama is in the top 4 as well. So if we put the 2 undefeated SEC teams in, who are the other 2 teams that you have in?
Right now, I've got Notre Dame sitting there at number 3. And I think that the fact that they've only lost by 1 point to the number 2 team, I think that's all the writing on the wall you need.
I think the Irish will be in tonight.
I think the number 4 team is up for grabs, but right now I have Clemson in. And I think a lot of people point at Ohio State and say, yeah, they lost to Oklahoma, who was a top 10 team, and Clemson lost to Syracuse. But Clemson also lost on the road on a Friday night and without their starting quarterback. So I think once you get Kelly Bryant back in the fold, he continues to play well. I think Clemson will continue to run the stretch. They have a big one against North Carolina State this weekend. If they win that game and keep running the stretch and only lose one game, I think they're going to be there in the end.
Here's what's tricky. I think the fourth best team in the country right now is actually Ohio State, but I don't know that the committee tonight can put Ohio State in over the other one-loss team that beat it in Oklahoma. That's where the debate gets kind of interesting.
Yeah, well, I think you also maybe in the committee's mind is a little bit of last year. I mean, Ohio State looks like a team that's gotten a little bit better about last year, but look at that game head up against Clemson last year. 31-0, Ohio State got beaten. It's nearly identical programs when you talk about Clemson winning the national championship. So I think that maybe sticks in the back of their head a little bit too. I think it's going to be interesting to see what it comes out. But like I said earlier in the show, this committee has shown the ability to set themselves up for later in the year not having to make tough choices. I think they're very careful tonight who they put in that fourth.
Hope y'all all have a happy Halloween tonight. Speaking of Halloween, it's the subject of our Champion of Life here. Much like Tennessee coach Butch Jones is looking for champions of life here on our program, we're looking for them as well. And Butch Jones kind of factors into the Halloween discussion because SECCountry.com recently today kind of collected a lot of these SEC-themed Halloween costumes that you're seeing on Twitter and put these out for the world to see. This happens every year, including Eric here on Twitter, who's Rodrigo Blankenship, the Georgia kicker. Now, I know Rodrigo. A lot of our audience might not. This is actually a pretty good costume here. Pretty good resemblance here to Rodrigo Blankenship. Pretty good job by Eric on that. Here's one, the Tennessee trash can there. The Team 121. I do like that. From SEC Country on Twitter. Another Butch Jones Halloween costume. I like the Champion of Life championship belt there.
Yeah, he's wearing
We got to get one of those Champion of Life championship belt. Got to put that on our wall here behind that.
We can hang it. Yeah.
I think that'd be a pretty good idea. I think we have a couple more we can show you here. Here's a guy being Kirby Smart, how to punish your more disciplined kid, kind of a classic Halloween costume. Kirby Smart, Butch Jones' daddy, I like that. Here's a young lady pretending to be Butch Jones, says, "Fire me, Team 121" on the trash can. You like that there from Linda. Here's Lark Malark on Twitter. Now, this is kind of a play on the Hugh Freeze situation. You see the cell phone on the one side, Hugh Freeze on the other. Anytime that a couple comes together for a Halloween costume, that's always a pretty good idea.
Yeah, and how awesome is it that the guy's girlfriend is like, you know what, I'll play the cell phone, you can play Hugh Freeze. She's taking one for the team almost, right? They're putting the box on for the night.
Yeah, exactly right. Nice job there. So whatever you're going to dress up as for Halloween tonight, we hope you enjoy yourself. Stay safe. It is my duty, obligation to say that. For goodness sakes, don't eat too much candy. But make sure you're back here at 3 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow for another episode of our program. Don't forget, subscribe to the podcast. A little bit of a technical issue yesterday. We're going to work on Monday's podcast. We'll get Monday and Tuesday up for you. Check that out on iTunes. You can also give us a rating and a review. Also, share this show with your friends on Facebook. Let them know we're talking about the SEC here each and every day on AT&T's SEC Country Live. Y'all have a great day, and we'll see you again tomorrow.